Divorce. The word hangs in the air like a death sentence, heavy and final. I'm staring at Jake across our coffee table, the legal papers spread between us like a battlefield map. His face has gone the color of old parchment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Behind him, his parents sit frozen on our couch, Carol's perfectly manicured fingers clutching her designer purse, as if it might somehow protect her from what's coming. I've had the business audited, Jake, I continue, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. You've run it into the ground. My mother's legacy, everything she built with her own hands, you've destroyed it. The silence stretches between us, punctuated only by the tick of the wall clock that once seemed so comforting. Now it sounds like a countdown to the end of everything I thought I knew about my life. 3 years ago, I would never have imagined I'd be sitting here, watching my husband crumble under the weight of his own greed. 3 years ago, I was Emma the optimist, Emma the peacekeeper, Emma who believed love could conquer all. How naive that girl seems now, like a character from someone else's story. Let me take you back to where it all began to unravel, to show you how a woman who had everything could lose herself so completely, only to find something stronger in the ruins. My name is Emma, and if you have a few minutes, I'll tell you how I learned that sometimes the people closest to you can become strangers, and sometimes strangers, the reflection in your own mirror after years of compromise, can become your salvation. I was born with what most people would call a silver spoon, but my parents never let me forget the weight of it. Dad built his engine additive empire from nothing but determination and a beat-up garage. I used to watch him through the window of his first workshop, his hands black with oil, his face lit with the kind of satisfaction that only comes from creating something with your own sweat. Emma, he'd tell me while washing his hands at our kitchen sink, the smell of industrial soap mixing with my mother's lavender sachets. Money is just a tool. It's what you build with it that matters. Mom was cut from the same cloth, transforming a single beauty salon into a chain that made her name synonymous with style across 3 states. I remember the way she'd run her fingers through clients' hair, not just styling but listening, creating a space where women felt beautiful and heard. Her divorce from Dad when I was 19 could have been a war zone, but they handled it with the same grace they'd shown in building their empires. They split everything down the middle and somehow managed to remain friends, showing me that even endings could be handled with dignity. Dad stayed contentedly single, married to his work and weekend golf games. Mom found love again, but kept her focus on the business that bore her name. They raised me to value hard work over handouts, to understand that privilege came with responsibility, not entitlement. If only I'd remembered those lessons when Jake walked into my life. I met Jake during my final semester of college, when I was bright-eyed and ready to conquer the world with my music education degree. He had this easy charm, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We'd sit in coffee shops for hours, talking about our dreams, our futures. He spoke about wanting to build something meaningful, about creating a life of purpose together. The Jake I fell in love with seemed to understand my values. He nodded approvingly when I talked about wanting to teach music to children, about making a difference rather than just making money. He even seemed impressed by my determination to live independently, to make my own way despite my family's wealth. I love that about you, he'd say, taking my hand across those sticky coffee shop tables. You're real, Emma. Not like those other rich girls who think the world owes them everything. I should have paid more attention to how he said other rich girls, as if he was already categorizing me, already seeing dollar signs where I thought he saw love. We married 2 years after graduation, a simple ceremony in my parents' garden. I wore my grandmother's dress, and Jake looked at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. For a while, we were happy. I taught elementary music, coming home exhausted but fulfilled, while Jake worked his way up at a marketing firm. We lived in a modest apartment, furnished mostly with hand-me-downs and flea market finds. It was perfect, or so I thought. The cracks began to show when I got pregnant with Lily. Suddenly, the simple life we'd built together wasn't enough for Jake. One lazy Sunday, as I graded papers and he channel surfed with his feet up on our second-hand coffee table, he dropped the first bomb. "Emma, babe," he said, not even looking away from the TV, "why don't you just quit your job? Stay home with the baby. We'll manage." I nearly choked on my tea. The casual way he said it, as if we were discussing what to have for dinner, made my stomach twist. Quit my job. Jake, you know we can't afford that on your salary alone. Plus, I love my work. He waved a hand dismissively, and for the first time, I noticed something calculating in his smile. Come on, Em. It's not like we're ordinary folks. Your dad's loaded. A little help from him, and we're golden. The words hit me like ice water. This wasn't about what was best for our family. This was about what was easiest. And that ease came with a price tag that had my father's name on it. That's not the point, Jake, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I'm not tapping into my parents' wealth for our day-to-day. We agreed to live within our means, but Jake wouldn't let it go. It was as if mentioning my father's money had opened some floodgate in him, releasing a current of entitlement I'd never seen before. The conversation came to a head at dinner with his parents a week later. Carol and Frank Martinez had always been particular. Frank was the kind of man who'd size up your car in the driveway before he'd shake your hand, and Carol had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. They'd raised Jake during leaner times. I knew that much. Frank had bounced between factory jobs, and Carol had worked retail to make ends meet. But somewhere along the way, they'd developed a taste for the finer things and a belief that they deserved them, regardless of their ability to afford them. That night, Jake brought up my consideration of taking time off work, framing it as if it were already decided. "Emma's considering taking some time off work," he announced over Carol's pot roast. "You know, with the baby coming and all." Carol's eyes lit up like she'd just spotted a sale at Nordstrom. "Oh, that's wonderful. With Emma's family, you two don't have to worry about a thing." I gripped my fork tighter, trying to keep my composure. "Actually, we haven't decided anything, and we intend to manage on our own, thank you." Frank, never one to miss an opportunity to insert himself into someone else's business, chuckled and shook his head. "Why play it the hard way, Emma? A little help from your folks, and you could be living easy. Why waste that opportunity?" There it was, the word that would haunt me for years to come. Opportunity, as if my parents' hard work, their success, was some lucky break that had fallen into my lap. rather than the result of decades of dedication and sacrifice. The conversation spiraled from there, with Jake and his parents painting grand pictures of a life lived on my parents' dime. Every word felt like a betrayal, twisting the knife a little deeper. They weren't seeing me, Emma the teacher, Emma the wife, Emma the soon-to-be mother. They were seeing Emma the trust fund, Emma the golden ticket, Emma the answer to all their financial dreams. That night, lying in bed next to Jake, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. The man beside me, the one who'd promised to love me for better or worse, was breathing steadily, apparently unburdened by our earlier conversation. But I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I'd become a commodity rather than a person. Jake, I whispered into the darkness, do you really think we should be relying on my parents like that? He rolled over, and in the dim light from the street lamp outside our window, I could see those eyes that had once melted my heart. Now they seemed cold, calculating. Emma, it's not about need. It's about what's smart. Your parents can afford it, and we deserve a break. Why not take it? Deserve. That word echoed in my head long after Jake had drifted off to sleep. What had we done to deserve anything? What had he done to earn my parents' money? What had I done except fall in love with someone who, I was beginning to realize, might have fallen in love with my bank account? I thought about my father, working 16-hour days in that first garage, his hands cracked and bleeding from the cold metal and harsh chemicals. I thought about my mother, staying up late to balance books and schedule appointments, building her dream one satisfied customer at a time. Neither of them had ever thought they deserved success. They'd worked for it, fought for it, earned it. And now their daughter's husband thought he deserved it too, just by virtue of marrying me. The thought made me sick. After that first clash about money and my parents, I held on to hope that maybe Jake and I could find our way back to the same page. Maybe the stress of impending parenthood had just brought out the worst in him. Maybe once Lily was born, once we held our daughter in our arms, we'd remember what really mattered. How wrong I was. Jake's parents weren't content to plant seeds of greed and then step back to watch them grow. No, Frank and Carol Martinez were active gardeners, tending to their son's newfound sense of entitlement with regular visits and constant reminders of what my family could do for them. I learned more about their background during those visits than Jake had ever shared with me. Frank would often launch into stories about his factory days, but not with the pride of a man who'd worked hard to provide for his family. Instead, his tales were filled with resentment about missed opportunities, about watching other men get promoted while he stayed on the line. I should have been a supervisor, he'd say, gesturing with his beer bottle, but it was all about who you knew, not what you could do. Carol would nod along, adding her own grievances about customers who'd treated her poorly during her retail years. Rich women coming in, acting like I was dirt under their shoes, she'd mutter, never saying please or thank you. Like their money made them better than me. It began to make sense, their fixation on my family's wealth. To them, money wasn't just about security or comfort. It was about status, about finally being the ones with power instead of the ones being looked down upon. They saw my marriage to Jake as their ticket to that world, their chance to finally be on the other side of the equation. One evening, we were all crammed in our small living room when Frank launched into his latest business idea. Some investment opportunity that just needed a small infusion of cash to get off the ground. So, Emma darling, Carol began, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that always made my teeth ache. With your family's resources, I bet you could easily help us out. It's such a sure thing. I tried to keep my cool. I really did. Carol, Frank, I've told you before. We're managing our finances independently. My parents' money isn't part of this equation. But Frank had the persistence of a door-to-door salesman and the subtlety of a freight train. Come on, Emma. It's not like you'd feel it. What's a few thousand to your dad? He probably spends that on golf in a weekend. The audacity floored me. Here they were, sitting in our home, eating our food, and they had the nerve to treat my family's hard-earned money like it was theirs for the taking. But what hurt more was Jake's response. Maybe they have a point, he said, avoiding my eyes. It's just a loan, right? We could help out family. Family. I nearly choked on the word. When had we decided it was our job to bankroll Jake's parents' dreams? When had their financial irresponsibility become our responsibility? Jake, when did we decide it's our job to fund your parents' get-rich-quick schemes? The room went ice cold. Carol, never one to let a moment of drama go by unexploited, gasped as if I'd slapped her. Well, I never. Here we thought family helped each other out. But if you're going to be stingy. Now I was seeing red. Working for what you have isn't being stingy, Carol. It's called being responsible. Maybe you should try it sometime. Frank tried to smooth things over, but the damage was done. Look, Emma, no need to get upset. We're just talking here. Talking? I couldn't hide my sarcasm. Seems like all we ever do is talk about how my family can solve your problems. That night, after they'd finally left with Jake apologizing for his parents' misunderstanding, I lay awake staring at the ceiling again. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a full-on invasion of our lives by two people who saw me not as a daughter-in-law, but as a walking, talking ATM. And Jake was handing them the pin. When our little Lily came into this world, I thought maybe, just maybe, the arrival of a grandchild would shift everyone's focus from my family's bank account to our actual family. I should have known better. Jake's parents showed up at the hospital with what had to be the cheapest onesie from the discount bin. It still had the clearance sticker on it. But when my folks arrived with a beautiful hand-knit blanket and some quality baby gear, you'd have thought World War III was about to break out in that sterile hospital room. Wow, really laying it on thick, aren't they? Carol quipped, eyeing the gifts with a mixture of disdain and envy. Must be nice to just throw money around. Bet they could have just gotten you a house instead of all this fluff. Jake, holding our daughter for the first time, should have been lost in the wonder of new fatherhood. Instead, he chuckled at his mother's comment. Yeah, Mom's got a point, Your folks sure don't hold back. A house might have been more practical, huh? My heart sank as I watched him cradle Lily, this perfect little person we'd created together, while calculating what her grandparents' love was worth in dollars and cents. Was this what our daughter meant to them? Just another angle to work, another way to get to my family's money? I tried to keep the peace, fighting back the anger that was building like a storm in my chest. Well, it's not about the price tag, right? It's the thought that counts. But Frank wasn't about to let it go. Oh, sure. But when you think about it, a nice little investment in property, now that's a gift that keeps on giving. The ride home from the hospital was tense, Jake trying to smooth things over with excuses about his parents being old-fashioned and not meaning anything by their comments. But the seed of doubt that had been planted months earlier was now taking root, growing stronger with each passing day. Had Jake really married me for love? Or had my family's bank account been the main attraction all along? A few weeks later, during one of their increasingly frequent and unwelcome visits, Carol brought it up again. We were all crammed in our living room, Lily fussing in my arms, when Carol couldn't resist another jab at the new stroller my mother had bought for us. Must be nice having your folks shower Lily with all these expensive toys and gadgets, she said, her voice dripping with that passive-aggressive tone I'd come to dread. Though a contribution to a house fund would have been more useful, don't you think? Jake, sitting beside his mother, nodded along like a puppet on strings. Actually, babe, we've been talking. Maybe your parents could help us out with a down payment instead of more baby stuff. Makes sense, right? I was floored. Not only were Jake's parents relentless in their pursuit of my family's money, but now Jake was fully on board with turning our daughter's birth into a bargaining chip for financial gain. Is that what this is about for you, Jake? Using my parents for money? I couldn't hide the hurt in my voice. I thought we were in this together, for better or worse, not for richer or poorer. Jake looked taken aback, but Carol just sniffed dismissively. Well, when your wife's parents are rich, it's only practical to think about these things. After they finally left, I sat in the nursery, Lily sleeping peacefully in her crib, and I felt something break inside me. This wasn't the life I'd dreamed of. This wasn't the family I'd wanted to build. I was surrounded by people who claimed to love me, but all they seemed to see when they looked at me was dollar signs. For the first time since I'd said, I do, I found myself wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. The next few years blurred together in a haze of small battles and growing resentments. Lily grew from a tiny, perfect baby into a bright, curious toddler who filled my days with laughter and wonder. But even her joy couldn't completely shield me from the toxic undercurrent that had infected my marriage. Jake's parents had worn me down with their constant hints and suggestions about how my family could improve their lives. Every birthday, every holiday, every casual visit came with a new scheme or request. And Jake, rather than protecting me from their greed, had become their chief advocate. Then life threw us a curveball that changed everything. My mother's accident came out of nowhere. One moment, she was the vibrant, successful woman who'd built an empire with her own two hands. The next, she was gone, leaving behind a legacy of success and a daughter drowning in grief. I was barely keeping it together, trying to be strong for 3-year-old Lily while processing the sudden, devastating loss of the woman who'd been my role model, my anchor, my friend. But Jake's first question after the funeral wasn't about how I was holding up. It wasn't about how we could honor my mother's memory or help Lily understand why Grandma wouldn't be coming to visit anymore. No, his first question was, so, how much are you getting from your mom's will? It felt like a physical blow. My mother wasn't even in the ground yet, and here was my husband, circling her remains like a vulture. According to Mom's will, I inherited the salon chain she'd spent decades building. It was a thriving business, but I knew nothing about running a company. I was drowning in grief and responsibility, and Jake was quick to offer his expertise. "Babe, let me handle this," he said, all confidence and smiles. "You know, I've got a knack for business. I'll take care of everything." I was too lost in my sorrow to argue, too overwhelmed to see the trap he was setting. I let him take the reins of my mother's life's work, though I made sure the ownership papers stayed in my name. At the time, I thought I was being smart. Looking back, I realize it was the only thing that saved me. Then, barely a year later, Dad suffered a massive heart attack. Losing both my parents in such a short span of time broke something fundamental inside me. I needed Jake more than ever, needed him to be my partner, my support, my rock in the storm. Instead, all he could talk about was what we'd inherit. The day after Dad's death, the day after we buried the man who'd taught me everything about integrity and hard work, Jake's parents showed up at our house. I expected maybe a moment of silence, a word of sympathy, a gesture of respect for my loss. Instead, they dove straight into speculation about Dad's wealth. "So, Emma," Frank said, barely able to contain his glee, "must be a hefty sum coming your way, huh?" I saw red. All the grief, all the pain, all the months of swallowing their greed boiled over in that moment. "Can you not, for once, just stop talking about money?" The words exploded out of me like shrapnel. "My father is dead, and all you can think about is what's in it for you." Carol put on her best offended face, the one she'd perfected over years of retail customer service. "Well, I never. We're just concerned about the family's future. No need to be rude." Jake tried to play peacemaker, as always. They're just curious. It's a big deal, you know." "A big deal," I echoed, my voice rising with each word. "My parents are gone, Jake. Both of them. And all you and your parents can think about is cashing in. Is that all I am to you? A bank account with legs?" The room fell silent. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake looked at me, then at his parents, and mumbled some half-hearted apology about everyone being under stress. But the damage was done. I couldn't stand the sight of them anymore, their greed, their complete lack of empathy, their inability to see me as anything more than a meal ticket. "Get out," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Get out of my house. Now." They left, Carol muttering under her breath, Frank scowling like a child whose toy had been taken away. Jake lingered, trying to justify his parents' behavior, but I was done listening. That night, as I sat in the darkness of our living room, I realized that I was completely alone. My parents were gone. My husband had revealed himself to be someone I didn't recognize. His parents saw me as nothing more than a source of funding. For the first time in my adult life, I had to figure out who Emma was when she wasn't trying to please everyone around her. 2 days after my father's funeral, 2 days after we'd laid to rest the man who'd built a business empire through sheer determination and integrity, Jake came bouncing through our front door like he'd just won the lottery. "Babe, I've got awesome news," he beamed, barely containing his excitement. "I've struck a deal to sell the hairdresser chain." Can you believe it? My jaw nearly hit the floor. The audacity, the complete disrespect for everything my mother had built, everything my father had just been buried for protecting, it took my breath away. "What? You did what?" Without even asking me? I was fuming, feeling a cocktail of betrayal and disbelief coursing through my veins. This was my mother's legacy, her life's work, and he was treating it like a commodity to be flipped for quick cash. Before we could really dive into the confrontation that was brewing, his parents showed up, ready to party like we'd hit the jackpot. They waltzed in with takeout from some expensive restaurant and bottles of champagne that screamed high roller. Carol was all smiles, waving those bottles in my face like victory flags. Guess what, honey? We've sold the old condo and put down a deposit on a beach house. We're all moving to the coast. I stared at her, feeling like I was trapped in some nightmare where everyone had lost their minds. Hold on, you what? Nobody asked me about moving. I don't want to live by the beach with all that humidity and salt air. With a kid, are you out of your mind? Carol just waved off my concerns like I was talking about the weather forecast. Oh, don't you worry about that. We've also booked a cruise. You should come with us. It'll be fabulous. Where is this money coming from? I asked, my patience wearing thinner by the second. Well, darling, Carol's eyes were practically sparkling with dollar signs. With your father's passing and the sale of the salons, money's no object now. We're set for life. Think about it, yachts, private jets, we're living the dream. I turned to Jake, utterly dumbfounded by the insanity unfolding in my living room. Why are we even talking about selling my mom's business again? And what's this nonsense about being set for life? Jake squirmed, avoiding eye contact like a guilty child. Babe, it makes sense. Managing both businesses will be too much. We've got to focus on what's more profitable. It's for our future, for our daughter's future. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The greed, the audacity, the complete disregard for everything my parents had worked for, it was all too much. Show me the financials for the salon, I demanded, my voice cutting through their celebration like a blade. I want to see everything before we make any rash decisions. Jake squirmed even more, his confident facade cracking. Look, it's all about our future, about making sure we're comfortable. His parents joined the chorus, pressing me to just let go and enjoy the windfall. But looking at them all, I could see nothing but vultures circling carrion. Why the rush to sell the hairdresser shops? I pressed, needing answers. What's the real reason? Jake shrugged, the picture of false reason. Look, babe, after your dad's gone, juggling both businesses just doesn't make sense. We've got to focus on what brings in more dough. The car oil thing is a gold mine compared to the salons. His parents perked up at this, chiming in with their toxic 2 cents. Darling, think about it, Carol cooed. Selling those little shops could give you a life of luxury. Why waste your time on them? The sight of them practically salivating over my inheritance made my skin crawl. These people had no understanding of what those businesses meant, of the sweat and tears and dreams that had gone into building them. To them, they were just assets to be liquidated, problems to be solved with cold cash. I want you to leave. Now, I said, my voice firm, my resolve crystallizing like ice in my chest. This is a time to mourn my father, not feast on what he left behind. Jake tried to interrupt, but I cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell. And another thing, this is my inheritance we're talking about. Mine. You and your parents have no say in this. The air turned arctic as they realized I wasn't the pushover they thought I was. With heavy steps and heavier scowls, they filed out of my house, leaving me alone with my grief and my growing determination. The lonely battle ahead seemed impossible, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was fighting for something that mattered. The dawn after my father's funeral found me sitting in his favorite chair, surrounded by the detritus of a life interrupted. The world around me had been drained of color, reduced to a monotonous gray that seemed to seep into my bones. That's when Jake decided to inject his version of vibrancy back into our shattered lives. Over a breakfast that tasted like cardboard, he launched into his agenda with the sensitivity of a bulldozer. "We need to call a meeting with the founders of your father's company, pronto," Jake stated, his voice cutting through the quiet like a rusty knife. "Time's money, babe." I paused, a piece of toast halfway to my mouth, and stared at him in disbelief. "Jake, my father was just buried yesterday. Can't this wait? I need some time to process everything." He waved off my concerns with a dismissive flick of his hand, like my grief was an inconvenience he couldn't be bothered to acknowledge. "Time is money, babe. We need to act fast if we want to maximize the value of these assets." Assets. He called my father's life's work assets. Desperate for some clarity in the chaos, I reached out to our family lawyer, asking for a complete breakdown of both business situations and a primer on what I was actually inheriting. I hoped the information would give me some solid ground to stand on in the quicksand my life had become. A month trudged by in a blur of legal jargon and financial statements. I was still processing my grief, still trying to figure out how to be a single mother to a 3-year-old while managing business responsibilities I'd never asked for. Then Jake, accompanied by his parents, like some twisted entourage, descended upon our house once more. Each of them was bursting with unsolicited advice and barely concealed greed. Without so much as a "hello" or "how are you holding up," Jake dove right into his demands. I've been thinking," he said, settling into my father's favorite chair like he owned it. "I'm the right man to lead your dad's company. I've got the vision, the drive, the business acumen." The audacity of his claim left me speechless. But he wasn't finished with his shopping list of demands. "And I'll need a new car. Something that screams business executive. The latest BMW should do the trick." Before I could even begin to formulate a response to this insanity, Carol chimed in with her own outrageous demands. "The coastal house is nearly ready," she announced, as if I'd been consulted about this fantasy property. "We just need to throw in another $300,000 for finishing touches. Plus some extra for furniture, of course." She paused, looking at me expectantly as if I should be grateful for the opportunity to fund their delusions. "And dear, I'll need you to set up a monthly account for me. I have a lifestyle to maintain, after all." I sat there, listening to them divide up my parents' legacy like pirates splitting treasure, and something inside me finally snapped. The grief, the betrayal, the months of swallowing their greed, it all crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. I knew what I had to do. It was like a switch had been flipped inside me, illuminating the path forward with brutal clarity. I'd spent months being Ms. Nice Guy, trying to keep the peace, trying to make everyone happy while my own life crumbled around me. No more. Clutching the divorce papers like a shield, I stepped forward, interrupting their greedy chatter. "Jake, we need to talk," I announced, placing the legal documents on the coffee table with a satisfying thunk. He picked them up, frowning as he tried to process what he was seeing. "What's this, babe?" His attempt at nonchalance couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. Divorce papers, I stated, each word deliberate and final. I've had the business audited, Jake. You've run it into the ground. My mother's legacy is teetering on the edge of ruin because of your management. His face drained of color like water from a broken dam. He looked like a guilty child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. I was trying to make it better, he stammered, his usual confidence evaporating like morning mist. Make it better? My voice rose, fueled by months of suppressed anger and betrayal.